Boston, all of Boston's history in an equitable and inclusive manner. During the second quarter of 2023, there was a focus on understanding, research, review, discussions with staff, commissioners, with an overview, reviewing the commission's priorities, discussions with internal and external stakeholders, and appreciating the challenges and opportunities that inform a broader city and regional set of goals. A preliminary timeline was created with a focus on the major milestone represented by the 250th anniversary of the nation in 2026, which served as a primary target for developing and implementing key aspects of the vision. Some of these timelines have been substantially met, while many others are evolving and being adjusted to suit changing conditions. We have and continue to undertake outreach. We have and continue to develop a vision. We have and continue to share the vision widely. And we have and continue to develop a strategy that was discussed with the Commission for expediting the backlog of petitions. In relation to outreach, for example, we have had discussions with the Boston Preservation Alliance, former state representative, Historic Boston, Inc., former and current commission chairs, former and current zoning chiefs, downtown Boston BID, private developers, the law department, commissioners of the environment, Boston Society of Architects, archives and special collections. And yes, we have had discussions with the Hyde Park Historical Society. We shared the vision with a kickoff last November at an event hosted by the Office of Historic Preservation in Roxbury. On March 12th, we shared the vision presentation with residents and commissioners of historic Beacon Hill District, downtown, and other interested parties. On March 26th, we shared this presentation with the Boston Landmarks Commission as part of their monthly public hearing. And on April 1st, we shared the vision presentation with residents of Mattapan and other interested parties. Tonight, we have the pleasure of sharing the presentation with the Hyde Park neighborhood. In the coming months, we will continue to share the vision presentation and seek community feedback. And now for the vision presentation. If there is one slide that stays with you after this presentation, it is this slide that captures the essence of the vision. The vision for historic preservation in Boston seeks to tell a more complete story of American history and draw from the significant preservation work that has been achieved in Boston. It reflects upon the current preservation landscape, and importantly, it seeks to embrace an incredible opportunity to chart a path forward, one that positions historic preservation to proactively demonstrate and encourage environmental stewardship, one that is responsible, relevant, and in alignment with contemporary values of equity, diversity, and inclusion. I thought I might start this presentation with the first locally designated historic district in Massachusetts, Beacon Hill. In the Book of Boston, the last chapter is titled A Suggested Tour of Federal Boston. It includes a list of historic sites concentrated on Beacon Hill. Long before its designation and following the siege of Boston, we can acknowledge that Beacon Hill was transformed into an enclave for wealthy and powerful Bostonians, and it continues to serve as the seat of political power in the Commonwealth. We know that the southern slope of Beacon Hill was developed with lavish homes for Boston's elite. and that the north and western slopes serve as the home of a working middle-class community, including many free African Americans. This area became a hotbed of abolitionist and Underground Railroad activity in the years leading up to the Civil War. Today, the historic Beacon Hill District is considered to be one of the finest and least altered examples of a large federal period urban area in the United States. It is also nationally recognized for its remarkable and often overlooked history, which is a potential opportunity. We know about the Lewis and Harriet Hayden House at 66 Phillip Street, whose owners had escaped slavery in the 1850s from Kentucky before settling on the north slope of Beacon Hill and establishing the most active Underground Railroad safe house in the city. This photograph from around 1909 shows part of the shield for the construction of a tunnel under Beacon Hill. We know about others documented as part of the historic homes on the Black Heritage Trail. These are known places associated with helping runaway slaves evade the law on both the north and south sides of the hill. But how do we know which places were stops on the Underground Railroad when this was a very secretive operation? In Dorchester, the Shirley Eustace House was known among nearby residents to be associated with enslaved people. It was the oral history that kept the story alive and subsequently confirmed by research and archaeological investigation. Imagine how many similar places might be discovered or lost due to an information gap. In Charlestown, our archaeological program is setting out to narrow the information gap through a community-led dig that would have the community ask questions about new information that may be uncovered. The vision for historic preservation in Boston recognizes the challenges and opportunities presented when there are information gaps that impact our ability to tell the full story. The vision includes a strategic focus that prompts us to ask how we might contribute to the national focus of uplifting underserved communities. Like how we might celebrate the contributions of the Haitian community in revitalizing Codman Square in Dorchester, or the Vietnamese community's efforts to save Fields Corner after the Vietnam War in 1975. How might we recognize the legacy left by the Jewish community along Blue Hill Avenue corridor? Until the end of World War II, the New York Streets neighborhood was a vibrant, multi-ethnic neighborhood of tenement houses and mom and pop shops, but it fell to make way for Boston's first urban renewal project. So many cities have a traumatic story to tell about their most vulnerable people being removed, and not just in recent history. In 1676, colonists removed the Massachusetts tribe to concentration camps on Deer and Long Islands. It is anticipated that there are several areas of unmarked burials on these islands, but their exact locations are unknown. These issues represent important investigative and research matters that relate to the vision's efforts to tell a more complete story and to uplift underserved communities. This will require time and resources. In relation to time and resources, I'm reminded that there are other types of opportunities that arise from a strength and a challenge. For most of the last half century, it has been a standard practice across the nation to devote nearly 100% of time and resources within historic preservation programs to processing applications and designating important places. We can acknowledge that such a focus has produced outcomes that reflect a particular strength and a host of challenges. To be sure, Preservationists are to be commended for their efforts in seeking to protect places of great historic importance that teach us about certain aspect of our past. A heightened interest in a resource-intensive approach to inform architectural preservation and restoration activities was evident in the legislation dating from the 1950s and 70s, and it remains evident in the practice of historic preservation that has influenced how historic preservation has been practiced for almost 70 years. If we consider the great opportunities and challenges that contribute to the baseline conditions of the Office of Historic Preservation, you will see that our challenges are also our opportunities. The department is made up of 3 divisions: the Archaeological Program, the Boston Landmarks Commission, and the Commemoration Commission. In relation to the Landmarks and District Commissions, there are a total of 11 commissions that may utilize up to 94 volunteers who are drawn from a limited pool. The number of volunteers increases with each district designation as a result of the enabling legislation that governs how historic preservation is practiced. In relation to the Landmarks Commission, where the vision seeks to uplift underserved community and mitigate adverse effects of climate change through historic preservation, the Commission has previously outlined their priorities to replace the demolition delay regulations known as Article 85, revise the enabling legislation, and update historic resource surveys. This represents 3 considerable challenges, and I would say 3 significant opportunities. In relation to staff time, the area outlined in red indicates that at least 60% of the office's resources is allocated to the landmark and district commissions. And at least 62% of this resource allocation is primarily for design review. In relation to design review, 95% of the applications that are required to go to district commissions are substantially appropriate before they get there because of the great work that staff undertake with applicants before a public hearing. And in New York City, 95% of the 13,000 applications received per year are resolved at the staff level. And while the vision identifies strategic priorities and opportunities for a broader rethink of how we might invest time and resources, it also identifies opportunities and challenges in reflecting the diversity of the community. Achieving equity must be reflected in power sharing and decision-making. The data nationwide, in terms of diversity within historic preservation profession, is even more challenging. It is known that the National Register of Historic Places has nearly 100,000 entries, yet only 2% represent African American history and less than 10% Black, Indigenous, and people of color. In relation to the Commemoration Commission, where the vision seeks to uplift underserved communities, it is anticipated that the Commission will not only advise on upcoming historic anniversaries, but the opportunity exists to begin telling the full range of Boston's history with the support of 3 subcommittees, each with specific goals for advising the mayor and relevant departments. Perhaps the Commemoration Commission might reduce a challenge and advance a significant opportunity to revitalize and revolutionize our approaches to safeguard meaningful places, local events, and the people who are too often left out of the official narrative of Boston's history. Perhaps this will be achieved where the makeup of the commission is more reflective of the diversity of Boston. In relation to the archaeological program, where the vision seeks to uplift underserved communities, we envision a focus on the Battle of Bunker Hill and the diverse histories in preparation for the 250th anniversary of the nation, including Native and Black participants in battle, enslaved members of Charlestown, and the role played by women and children. Up to this point, I have identified several issues and challenges, some opportunities and ideas, and now for some strategic priorities. A key strategic priority of the vision includes updating and streamlining historic preservation regulations, practices, and procedures that in turn would support an investment of time and resources in uplifting underserved communities and mitigating the adverse effects of climate change. To do this, we anticipate reviewing existing regulations with respective commissions that could support streamlining. This might include everything from preparedness for public hearings that are reserved for impactful applications to legislation and preservation tools and a view towards sustainable commissioner roster that supports efficiency and excellence in service. In relation to the designation process, there are approximately 76 pending landmarks and 2 pending landmark districts, where some petitions date back to 1977. Under the current system, it will take years to clear the backlog, and that is accompanied by an assumption that there would be no new petitions during that period. Clearing the backlog and developing a more sustainable approach going forward is part of streamlining. In relation to our legislative authority, the vision recognizes that we must not exercise authority over properties where no such authority exists. But as with any certified local government in the nation, we should be exercising our authority under federal and state enabling legislation to designate historic resources deemed to be significant to the city of Boston. And this includes places that are of local significance. I understand that there has been an interpretation of the legislation that has led to a certain practice. However, this fundamental authority has been confirmed by the City of Boston Law Department. In relation to streamlining the design review process to support efficiency and user friendliness, this could include everything from expediting certain reviews to making district standards more user-friendly. It could also mean adjustments that expand best practices that would serve the Landmarks Commission, staff, and users better. This would allow for the development of a historic context statement and administering historic resource surveys that focus on underserved communities. Updated surveys are necessary so that we understand what may be of historic value and what ought to be considered for some form of protection. In the absence of updated surveys, protecting the historic character of Boston, especially in underserved communities, is an exceptional challenge and a significant opportunity. This would allow for encouraging a rethink of Article 85 as a climate action strategy, supporting environmental stewardship through pilot projects, pursuing demonstration projects that leverage the power of historic places to support economic development objectives, exploring distressed homes as an affordable housing option, and exploring pilot projects that support climate action mitigation measures. In turn, we believe that this would provide opportunity for broadening the historic preservation program, education and awareness opportunities, excellence in service, and increased interdepartmental collaboration. Amongst the strategic priorities would be encouraging a rethink of Article 85, not as an extension of the same thing, but rather as a climate action strategy. One possible strategy could be to incentivize the use of embodied energy that already exists in structures and embrace new development that would leave a smaller carbon footprint than the standard approach that often involves the demolition of reasonably sound structures followed by a type of new construction that may not have sufficient regard for environmental stewardship. In relation to environmental stewardship, published data shows that the largest percentage of distressed single-family homes in Boston are within the communities of Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. Another strategic priority might draw the connection between climate change and historic preservation. There can be no doubt that climate change has and will continue to impact historic places. We should have regard for those underserved communities that are subject to exceptional heat gain. Those are the communities that are often least equipped to reduce such adverse effects. In relation to climate action strategies, these three known facts play an important role in this vision. Buildings are the largest consumers of energy, and the most severe harms from climate change falls disproportionately on underserved communities. In this regard, it would be beneficial to invest in those underserved communities with energy audits, weatherization, and basic maintenance. These low-tech interventions are often labor-intensive and use local materials, which in turn is good for the local economy. In relation to the local economy, we can acknowledge that historic preservation is a powerful tool for housing and economic development. Boston's local economy is inextricable from its unique and rich historic environment. In relation to the construction industry, a key indicator of the strength of a local economy, the most effective low-cost measure that local governments can take to boost economic activity through this sector is by streamlining its permitting processes. In this regard, it would be beneficial to expedite any application that rescues a threatened, underutilized, or distressed historic property, especially where it also satisfies the strategic priorities of uplifting underserved communities and mitigating adverse effects of climate change through historic preservation. One of the common threads in this vision is the imperative related to keeping an eye on investment. These are important matters that the vision acknowledges as it leans towards an equitable and sustainable vision for historic preservation in Boston. And in relation to achieving these important objectives, it keeps an eye on the 250th anniversary of the nation and subsequently the 400th anniversary of Boston as potential milestones. Now, if you look closer into the eye, you will see strategic priorities, including opportunities for professional development for staff, capacity building, and identifying the window of opportunity that would support proactive preservation planning. In closing, we can acknowledge that the practice of historic preservation has been built and sustained on the priorities and framed primarily from the perspective that have excluded people of color, women, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, and other underserved communities. Equity and accessibility within the practice are vital to ensure that we uplift underserved communities and create means for people of non-dominant racial identities to participate and effectively lead preservation programs. This means that the practice of historic preservation can no longer succeed in isolation simply by valuing heritage assets and regulating change to the physical fabric of a relatively exclusive community. In addition, the 21st century challenges of climate change, affordable housing, civil unrest, development pressures, and the need to integrate all aspects of economy, environment, society, and culture for positive outcomes, there are clear signals that we must push forward with deliberate thoughtfulness and impactful strategies seen through an equity lens. We know that historic preservation has historically struggled to dedicate time and resources to elevating minority voices across the nation. Boston is no exception. This vision proposes a way forward. When we think about Boston, the evidence is clear. It is unquestionably a richer place for having its African American meeting house. It's richer for its Chinatown, knowing very well that Chinatowns are at risk across the nation. Boston is richer for its Beacon Hill, the Hyde Park Women's Heritage Trail, Boston Common, its brownstones, and let's not forget the intangible cultural values, including ethnic foods, the cannoli at Mike's Pastry, and the oral tradition of storytelling. When we consider Boston's known rich history, consider the richness that may lie in all those layers that may not be commonly known. This vision would have us start by rethinking how we practice historic preservation in Boston. And by 2030, Boston's Office of Historic Preservation would be nationally known for its transformative efforts to uncover, share, and preserve local stories of the city's rich history, advancing environmental stewardship and uplifting underserved communities for the benefit of present and future generations. Thank you so much. Now, these are the questions that we have asked as part of an interactive exercise. It would be helpful if you could take 10 minutes to offer your thoughts on these questions. Hand them back to us before we wrap up with a Q&A session.
Hi, everyone. We just launched a poll with 5 questions, so please feel free to answer all of them, and the poll will be closing soon.
Uh, 23%.
Okay.
Yep.
Probably vote.
For those of you that are joining us online, just about 5 minutes, so finish up your questions and we'll be with you in shortly. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just about a minute left for the poll, so please feel free to jot down your answers now. Again, about a minute left. Oh.
Okay, so thanks for taking that time to provide the feedback. This is really an important part of the process for us because what we want to do after each of these presentations is to gather the feedback. We'll also be mindful of, what's coming in for Q&As. People also email us after the fact. And then we're going to gather all of that feedback and look at ways of presenting it back so that you know what everyone else has said in the community. You know where the consistency is. So we're going to be collecting it, analyzing it, repackaging it, putting a little bow on it, and then sending it back out, whether it is digitally or whether it is in the form of other presentations. That's still to be determined, but your input is very much appreciated, and so that's how we're going to be using it. Once we have looked at the various feedback, it will inform what type of action plans are most appropriate stemming out of the vision. So to return to that one slide that I wanted to make sure that stayed with you, we can go into questions, and I've just brought this back because it serves as a reminder, and it may also help you formulate your questions that relate to these key themes of the vision. Yes. Yes.
Curious how you plan to interact with the squares and sweeps initiative. So, for example, there's some beautiful Victorian homes along Hyde that were built before Hyde Park incorporated into Boston. And, that's something that makes Hyde Park unique. How do we make sure that with the zoning changes, that there's some sort of protection
Great. Yeah. So the question was, how are we going to, or how do we plan to interact with strategies such as streets and squares? And how might we have input on zoning and how resources are protected? Great question. We have been having some preliminary discussions with our colleagues in zoning and design. Before we can protect anything, we have to identify what may be significant. That takes us right back to one of our key challenges and key opportunities, which is updating historic resource surveys. It is one of the most fundamental aspects of land use planning. So not just historic preservation, but any planning, comprehensive planning, zoning updates needs to have that as baseline data in order to plan, in order to protect, in order to safeguard character. So we have been encouraging, we need to have historic resource surveys so that we know what is important, what is significant. Those are the types of early discussions we've been having, and we're hopeful that we will have more opportunities to be impactful as those strategies, the same with Plan Downtown, the same with Plan Charlestown, and other planning and zoning initiatives take shape. We're hoping to be part of that conversation early so that we can help get the cart and horse relationship appropriate, because when it gets too far down the pipe, very difficult for us to have meaningful discussions about undertaking historic surveys if you've spent 4 years doing something and now you're ready to go to print. So we are hopeful, because one of the aspects of the vision is interdepartmental collaboration. That is not only one of the aspects of the vision, but it is a citywide priority. So we're hopeful that that interdepartmental collaboration will produce the kinds of results that you have raised.
Staff to do that quickly.
Ah, there is another question. Do we have the staff to do that quickly?
We're not need volunteers.
We need everyone in this room and all of your friends and colleagues, because here's the thing. Staff are, I would say, and Nick can correct me on this, staff are probably fairly close to 100 to 101% committed on their current task of regulating change, processing, all of that stuff, the things that we have done so well for 70 years. The vision says there are also very large and important urgent matters that are not only affecting the city of Boston, that are affecting the nation, the globe. We need to be participants in those huge aspects: climate change, affordable housing, economic development. We have a role to play. What the vision says is, we cannot continue the practice as we always have and not address those things. What we need to do is we need to think about, how do we streamline our processes and regulations? That's one. It's not going to solve everything, but so that we can spend a lot less time doing the administrative and processing, and that we can deal with some of the larger items, that we can administer consultants that are assisting us, that we can work in the community with volunteers, that we can look at all the avenues to gain resources, whether it's temporary or whatever. Because to answer your question, no, we don't have enough staff to do all that.
It's gonna take a long.
Well, it
Produce something to get a volunteer to staff.
it can take a long time if with the feedback from the community says, no, we think we want everything to stay the way it is. We like it the way it is. Yeah, it'll take a long time. It doesn't have to take a long time. Because if you notice through the vision, there was a lot of emphasis on investing time and resources. Those resources can be human, financial, or otherwise. There is a great opportunity for us to hopefully capture a meaningful budget that would allow us to work with communities, to work with volunteers, to work with consultants, to achieve some of the things that we couldn't do as staff, but maybe we could do it if we had this, this, and this. And some of those things can be done reasonably quickly. So for example, one of the big ticket items is updating historic resource surveys. Sure, we don't have the staff to do that, but if we have other resources that could do it, we can do it in, let's say, a multi-year, 5-year plan, but it's going to take a commitment to doing that and recognizing that it's not just something for historic preservation, but it is essential to land use decisions of which we make every day. So thanks for that question. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess I'm wondering, because the issue is really time and opportunity, and how we balance kind of the development issues and squares and streets and all of the needs of historic preservation and the key issues that we've been talking about in terms of the climate crisis. So I guess I just wonder, given that time is really limited and the squares and streets piece feels like it's moving at the speed of light. If you look at the fact that since 2019, the Boston Preservation Alliance has been talking about rewriting Article 85, and we're still talking about rewriting Article 85. I'm wondering if there's a model Article 85 and where that is in the city council, and whether or not you guys are presenting it, putting it forward where that is, with different organizations, with community, with city council, because that was 5 years ago. And we're talking about how do we do any of this because we don't have enough resources, and maybe it'll take 5 years, but this has already taken 5 years. So what do we do about that? I mean, how do we really address the conundrum of development closing in on us, especially in Southwest Boston, and all these needs? I mean, we support you and your vision. The real issue is actualizing that vision in a way that we don't get left behind.
Great series of questions. I'll try to capture it and essentially it is, do we have a plan for amending Article 85? Because we've been talking about it for at least 5 years. And is that something that we are working on? And it's largely because of the sense of pressure that is perceived from development encroaching in certain areas. The Article 85 policy itself it rests with zoning. Now, we are participants in the process, but in terms of how we might be able to advance, our role is going to be encouraging, pushing, suggesting, mentioning, sharing ideas, and hoping that those that can actually lift it and run with it will do it as expeditiously as is needed based on the changing development pressures. We have had discussions. My understanding is, as we speak right now, it is not in a form that has been developed and reviewed and circulated and ready to go to print. We're not at that stage. I tend to think that we need to think about it differently. Because Article 85 is largely like any demolition delay. And most demolition delays that I have come in contact with in the last 35 years do not serve the purpose of preservation. They are incorporated in preservation ordinances. They give the hope and expectation that you're gonna have a good outcome, but the reality doesn't side well with historic preservation. So why don't we think of it differently? Instead of thinking of it as a preservation tool, why aren't we thinking of it as a climate action strategy that encourages the kinds of behaviors and solutions that mitigate climate change? And that way you cast the net much wider. So we're not just talking about a 20% that may or may not be significant, but we're also talking about the other 80% that may be sound structures that perhaps are not historically significant, but maybe they contribute to the character of an area. So we really have to think about how do we actually look at other strategies that have some traction and have some investment already and commitment, like climate change, like affordable housing. How do we attach our historic preservation caboose onto this train that has momentum? And can that take us to a destination that we would find acceptable? That's really the idea, as opposed to going it alone on our own train, on our own track. Yeah, we may get there someday, or we could be having this discussion in another 5 years. But are there other initiatives that the city is already committed to heavily that we might be able to find common ground in what they're trying to do, but that might also achieve historic preservation objectives? Thanks for the question. Yes.
Hi, Murray. Thanks for coming out. Frank O'Brien here. Just a quick comment and then a question that follows on to this thread. So the quick comment is I really want to acknowledge Mariama's work. And now she's transitioning, as well as Roseanne. She was always a friend of our library here. My question is, following this discussion about Article 85 and moving forward on the initiatives you've described, can you talk a little bit about how the commemoration committee is fitting into that, and especially the work group within the commemoration committee that is focusing on legislative tools, and how you see them progressing and what their role is and how we can do to help support that?
Yes, good question. And the question was about the Commemoration Commission, and in particular the Legislation and Preservation Tools Subcommittee, and how we might fit into that. We have had a couple of presentations of this idea of thinking about changes to Article 85. So we've done a presentation and said, look, before you go down the path of just extending the Band-Aid, maybe we're not maybe thinking about making it longer, i.e. instead of X number of days, you aim for a year. Think about it, because I suspect that when that year is up, we'll be having the same discussion, and we'll be saying it's not effective, it doesn't achieve the objectives, because then folks will just build into that time as the cost of doing business. They'll plan for it. So we have done a presentation to the subcommittee to have them thinking other ways. Maybe there are other tools even beyond what we've suggested here, but be creative and think about ways to address multiple problems and issues. They have the ability to develop recommendations, and make recommendations to the mayor. We are hopeful that that team will not only tackle Article 85, but they will also see the urgency of updating our legislation, our regulations, and everything that really needs to be brought from 1955 and 1975 up to 2025 with the lens that we have now of equity, of climate change, affordable housing, and all of those things. So it is a work in progress. The question of how they will do it is still being raised. Being resourced is an important question. It's still being raised. So some of the questions that you've asked are also being asked by others. So it is a work in progress that we are hoping to put more meat on the bones as the commission gets into more of these issues, identifies what are really the essence of the problem, and there's going to be recommendations going back and forth for resourcing.
Just really quickly, do you have any sense of the timeline of those, when the recommendations will be issued to the mayor?
So the question was in relation to the timeline for those recommendations. The ordinance basically says the timeline for the commemoration commission is 2030. Now, that's not to say that on the eve of 2030, all these recommendations are going to be. I suspect that there are going to be recommendations that are going to start flowing in relation to the 250th anniversary, which is 2026. And there are some activities which, if we are going to uplift them for 2026, we probably will need to start on them in 2023 in order to get them done. So it's possible that some recommendations could start flowing in the next 12 months. Yes.
How you break down staff, like you got 60% on motivation, 26% on raise, et cetera. So my question is like, who in your staff is on looking at this picture of like how people obviously in this community, we know what's precious, we're all behind historic preservation, like who's developing programs for potential like training and certification to get volunteer designators, or to get volunteers to go through that backlog and deal with like that we've got this fast moving thing happening. Is there anybody on the staff who is looking at how we can get community members to actually take on some of this work that we'd be excited to potentially be doing?
Great question. The question was, who do we have on staff that is actually taking down all the names of the fantastic volunteers who are able to help or creating training? So I will say, and Nick can correct me on this, that staff are currently probably in the order of 100 to 101% already committed to the administration of 10 districts. That is one of the key issues that the vision has identified. If we continue to operate the same way we always have, we just don't have the capacity to do the important work that you've raised. But education and awareness and building capacity and outreach to communities is absolutely an important aspect to the vision. Now, Nick is going to correct me because he has all kinds of extra.
And I will say that since I have last met with this group here, is that we have since hired an architectural historian, which we did not have recently. So that architectural historian is also working on study reports in-house, whereas before we would have to contract out all of our study reports. So we are starting to take some of that workload in-house to get rid of that backlog. And one little tiny correction, Murray, is that we have made progress on that backlog, and we're now down to 69 outstanding landmarks. So we were up there a little bit further. We just landmarked 2 buildings this past week. The Hutchinson Building, which is on Providence Street in downtown Boston, and the Blue Cross Blue Shield Building, which is a Paul Rudolph modern, mid-century modern brutalist structure. So we are making progress. And we have prioritized certain landmarking, as Marie had mentioned before. And we do now have at least one staff person that is facilitating writing the reports in-house.
So when I know what the goal and they tell the different areas and some things inspiring and things like saving all the staff, etc. But I feel like there's always this focus on the big buildings downtown. And so the points that are brought up here, like you look at problems around what they did at the west side, what they said homes, where they were able to get grant funding and incentivize people fixing their own homes in historically accurate ways without getting a designation so that they couldn't put in a new banister if they wanted to, and that treating this as historically accurate versus just preserving it aesthetically. And so I guess that's my other question, sort of like, where did all our homes, like in our neighborhoods, fall off too? Because we're going to keep saving downtown Beacon Street, which has no end resources, financially speaking. But what about Mattapan and Hyde Park and these places that the homes of the buildings also deserve that?
Yes, good question. The question was, what about the homes that are in areas such as Mattapan, Roxbury, Dorchester, that are not in downtown, and of course Hyde Park. Of course Hyde Park. The vision identifies all the areas that we don't have surveys. A lot of those areas are the ones that you just spoke about. We need to focus on those areas. Here is the practice. The practice is we're focusing on a very select group of communities, and they are well-resourced for the most part. The vision recognizes that, and it says we need to think differently about historic preservation. That is identifying underserved communities. If your community has never been surveyed, that's an underserved community. We haven't spent time on Hyde Park. There are no historic resources that appear that we would either have a pilot project to assist property owners, or there are few resources where our time is invested. Our time is invested exactly where you've said. I think we need to invest more of our time in those places that do not have surveys, that do not have programs. That's what the vision wants to do. But we need a groundswell of community support in order to be able to say, look, we need the resource. The community has spoken. The community has expressed its preferences, its desires. Let's invest in those. Yes.
Visions require any discussion about them, but let me tell you a few things about Hyde Park that you don't hear or know about. We have a bridge down here. Beautiful bridge. It's been down for 2 years, it'll be down for 2 more years. I can't believe that the visions that you're talking about are going to be done any quicker than this bridge. That's the main entrance to our downtown area taking 4 years. 15 years, over 15 years, we've waited for the Barton Rogers next door to be restored and renovated. That's a historical building. It's finally happening, but it took a lot of crying and a lot of whining and a lot of God knows what. I've got a project for you. We've got a movie theater right here in Hyde Park on Fairmount Avenue that was a vaudeville house. And we already had estimates of what it's gonna cost to in fact fix that up and make that a centerpiece of our city. And it's gonna be approaching $2 million. That takes money. So visions are one thing, but dollars and cents are another.
And the question is,
The question is, what about the money?
okay, the question was, what about the money? There was a couple of things that I repeated throughout the vision, and that was time and resources. Resources is money. Resources is people. It should be no surprise to anyone that this vision goes nowhere without time and resources. You are absolutely correct. Historic preservation takes money. It's a challenge globally. But for clarity, I will say and reiterate, this vision never intended to be without resources. It makes it very clear that if we are to have a climate action strategy, we obviously have to include historic preservation because it's part of climate mitigation. If we are going to have an affordable housing strategy, well, historic preservation obviously should be part of that. There are pilot projects that are identified that need funding. So there should be no thought that we can do this on paper and it'll get done. The paper does need to be green, and it does need to be tangible. And we've made that fairly clear, and we actually put together a budget to support the vision. That was our role. Then there's the role of others. So point well made, point well taken, but it does definitely rely on resources and time.
Yep. And I just want to acknowledge your question about progress. So you know, a lot of you are native Bostonians, and you know that our department and our agency has been chronically underfunded. I will tell you that the Wu administration has approved the most landmarks in our communities since 1975. So we have a lot of work to do, we have a lot of money that we need, and we have a lot of projects that we need to get started. But I'm telling you, we have made progress. Mr. Miller, who has done historic preservation all around the world, and not just the country, all around the world, he has been hired. This is a brand new position. And again, the Wu administration has approved the most landmarks that we have ever done since 1975. So we're making progress, but there's a lot more work to do. But Murray is a testament to that progress happening. So I just wanted to.
Because many of us have been around here since and well before 1975.
Sure.
Yeah. And the cynicism is appreciated and acknowledged because I have seen many cities across the nation and other nations have wonderful plans. And the one thing that is consistently missing in a lot of plans is the meaningful investment in implementation. We can talk about historic preservation and we can do the best plans. We'll need some more shelves. But the important thing about a vision, about any plan, is the resources to implement. And we've impressed that this is not something that we think should just be an academic discussion, because there are real impactful things here that could address the city's priorities. And of course, they're going to take investment. So I've seen a lot of what you're concerned about. I'm hopeful, but it is challenging, especially in the current environment. Now, if we had had this discussion 2 years ago, there may have been a different, I guess, sentiment about how the city was doing in terms of property taxes and the economy and all that. Things are changing. The whole fallout from the COVID and how buildings are used has really changed a lot. And that has impacted municipal budgets across the country. So I'm hopeful, but I'm also a realist. And I do know that the value of a vision or study is most felt by the community when you have the resources to actually implement it. Yes.
I would say, I don't want to speak for all of the board, but I do believe that Hyde Park would really support and volunteer in. We see the Historical Society sees historic preservation as our mission, but we would need guidance. And as to what Bethany said, training so that we can do that and help as much as we can in the community.
And
I do think that we can pull that off.
Yeah, and I hope you put that on your response, because where it indicates how you can be helpful, we want to be able to come back and say, okay, now we have something that we would love for you to be helpful, helpful to. But we also have to free up staff time to be able to do the training, to be able to do the outreach and all that. It's all interconnected, but we have to be able to, as a city, as a community, we have to be able to commit ourselves to practicing historic preservation differently than we have in the past. Otherwise, we'll be still here in 5 years' time, and hopefully everyone else who hasn't come tonight will be here as well. Yes.
Is there a way to comment on this vision after this? Because yeah, there's more on like the comments stuff like that, just because all the questions everyone's been asking to make me think about this, how everything is so siloed in Boston, and how can we kind of come to all together to the table, because like you mentioned, we all have resources and we want to help, but I think right now people are kind of coming to the second line. It's like, oh, you're up next, you're up next. Not everyone at the table at the same time. And I feel like if we're able to all, as a neighborhood, as I mean, there's like 15 neighborhoods in Boston, I'm sure there's more. How can we all come together and kind of come in a collaboration agreement, because it seems like there's all of these similar challenges in each neighborhood, and is there a process where it can be understood?
Yes, so the first part of that question was, is there going to be an opportunity for follow-up questions? And the answer is yes. There is you can go to our website. You can always provide feedback. We're going to be doing presentations probably for another month or two. So when you have a chance to think about what you saw, seen, you've heard other questions, you think of other questions, by all means, send them to us. The idea of getting together multiple communities, I have thought that it would be great if we could have had all the communities together to do the vision presentation. That was the theory. We could do one presentation to everyone. We could have another presentation with everyone to brainstorm and discuss and how we pool resources and do all that. I think it would be fantastic. That's the theory. The practice is different. So here we are in the lovely community of Hyde Park. And all the communities that you're referring to, yeah, we talk to them, or we will be talking to them, or, yeah, so it is disconnected. If you have suggestions or ideas how, once we gather the feedback, and we want to then share that with everyone, if you have any thoughts as to how that could work and get a lot of communities together, we'd love to hear it. We can all come to your place if that works. We will go wherever. We'll come to you. You don't have to come downtown. We'll come to you.
Maria, I think we have time for one more question, and I think that there's an online question that we should take.
Yep.
So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute. It looks like it is. Ava, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Just go ahead and say it one more time. Ava, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah, we have time for one more question. What's your question?
That's okay. Thank you. So I gather from the presentation that your current thinking is to reduce the input of, or maybe even existence of the commissions and leave most of the decisions to the staff. And I'm just curious to know if this change would require any changes to the enabling legislation on the state level. Because my concern is that with all the good intentions that staff people have, I have observed that it is not possible for them to stay on top of all the details and the context of certain projects to really make independent decisions without the community input. And if we do not have commission hearings with people being able to provide their insights and guidance as residents, we would be losing something very, very important. So I would like to know, what is your plan in terms of maintaining the input of the commissions, and if you are determined to reduce their participation, if it requires the state's approval.
Thank you for the questions. The question is in terms of whether or not there would be reductions in commissions and neighborhood involvement, and would that require a change to the legislation? So the vision is putting out ideas and suggestions. The vision is not making changes. We are going to seek feedback from the community. We are going to seek feedback from district commissions. They're going to hear what the community thinks. And we're going to have some action plans. So if there is an overwhelming support for streamlining, and streamlining is going to be multifaceted. It's not simply one aspect. Streamlining also includes making sure that when you come to a district commission hearing, that you are well prepared so that you're not actually seeking clarification on what the applicant is proposing in the middle of a public hearing. That's part of streamlining. Streamlining is also how we do things in a way that if you have something that is likely to have a very minor effect or negligible effect, do we really want to have customers, constituents, applicants waiting for long periods of time on something that staff could otherwise make a decision on using the same district guidelines, the same policies? Or do we want to say, no, let people wait? If it takes 6 weeks and if they get continued, if it takes another 4 weeks, that's okay. Streamlining will say, are there ways that we can deliver service, high quality service, in a way that is good for our historic preservation program, that is good for the neighborhood, that produces a good outcome? And that may have various aspects to it. In terms of whether or not the legislation would need to be changed, in some cases, maybe. In some cases, maybe not, because I understand that changing legislation can take a couple of days. We don't have that long. Years and years to change legislation is not something that the vision anticipates. We've got a couple of milestones. The 250th anniversary, the 400th anniversary of the city of Boston. It could take until 2030 to get legislation approved. So I would say the vision is not looking to change legislation, even though we acknowledge that legislation probably needs to be changed. The vision is going to be looking at other avenues to achieve best outcomes. It also doesn't mean that the vision is suggesting that there be no neighborhood input. Of course, there will be neighborhood input. But how do we do that in a way that is smart, that is streamlined, that is effective, that also allows us time to spend with communities in training so that they can assist us? How can we do it in education and awareness? How can we do it in ways that allows our staff to do other activities? That is all related to streamline. Thank you for the question.
Thanks.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. We very appreciate you being here. We do have to be out of the building by 8 sharp, so thanks for coming. I have business cards if anyone needs them, and I'm happy to connect you with Murray if he doesn't have business cards on him. And then thank you all online for participating. We very much appreciate you being here tonight, and the recording will be available online in the future. So thank you. Have a good night, everyone.